And 3, 2, 1. We are live on LinkedIn. Mary MacCarthy here with a very special edition of the Data Tea, streaming as always live on LinkedIn. We're also now live on YouTube. This week I'm joined by a name that most of you learned probably not even, reading the latest data news, but reading your textbooks. I don't want to age you, Bill, but people learned about you in their textbooks. I'm joined by none other than Bill Inman, the father of data warehousing. Bill, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Mary. It's a real pleasure.
So we are speaking to each other from opposite sides of Denver. I'm on the west side. You're slightly east of downtown, I think. So next time we'll have to do this in person. I have to start with the caveat that my dog is here. I don't know where your dog is, but mine sometimes barks in the background. So if that happens, it's just part of live streaming. Yep. So I want to start, Bill, with not with data warehousing, but by asking you what your take is on social media. I found you on LinkedIn. You're active on LinkedIn, not just with articles that you publish on there, but you really, dive into arguments and discussions and debates. Not everyone who's a legend in their field is willing to put themselves out there in that way. What made you get active on social media?
My temper, that I heard people say things, I read people saying things that simply weren't true, and so it was like poking me out of my bed in the morning, saying, "Okay, get up," because I certain things I just can't take sitting down, and so the motivation came from people saying things that weren't true, and so I just couldn't sit there and watch it.
So I'm assuming not personal attacks, because you are largely the undisputed father of data warehousing, but more, it seems like people saying things that were untrue about data warehousing, right?
That's correct.
So let's dive straight into some of that. What's going on? What have you been seeing? I know you critique a lot what vendors say about data warehousing, and you use a very strong word. You use repeatedly that we don't have FCC guidelines here, so I can say it out loud. You attribute the bastardization of data warehousing to vendors. What's the crux of your argument there?
Well, vendors will do anything to make a sale, and they will take their product and say, "Oh yeah, we have 2 or 3 features that are similar to a data warehouse. Let's go tell people that this is a data warehouse." And not in every case, but in case after case, they're not telling the truth. They're telling a half story, and the half story that they're telling is dangerous to people. Here's what happens: people say, "Aha, I'm going to buy this product. I'm going to buy this data warehouse." They buy it, and then they find out that it doesn't work. And what happens is data warehouse gets the blame. And so you say, "Oh, data warehouse doesn't work because so-and-so and so-and-so said they were going to do such and such a thing." And so data warehouse is the fall guy. And that's not true. That what the vendors have produced, for the most part, is not a data warehouse, never was a data warehouse, but was sold as such. So vendors use data warehousing to sell their products, whether they are have an approach with integrity or not.
So let's go ahead and define, obviously, what a data warehouse is. Lots of people who watch this know, but some don't, and that's okay. And let's do it in a way that's kind of similar to your writing. So your writing, I'm a big fan of, because you explain things in a way that like a middle schooler could understand. There's not lingo. And that's a compliment. I'm not saying you dumb things down, but you explain it in a way that you don't have to know industry jargon. So what's the 8th grader's version of what a data warehouse is?
Well, let me tell you, Mary, it's been amazing to me that I gave the definition of data warehouse to the world, 25, 30 years ago, a long time ago. It's been amazing to me that the definition has remained the same all these years. But A data warehouse is a subject-oriented, integrated, non-volatile, time-variant collection of data for management decisions. Now let's go through each one of those. Subject-oriented. It means that the focus on a data warehouse is not on applications and process, but on the data itself. So things like product, things like order, things like customer, that's the focus of that. Integrated. It means that the data that goes into a data warehouse, it needs to be integrated. You see, people have all of these siloed applications, and the siloed application data is not integrated. So, and there are 100 reasons why data isn't integrated. Non-volatile. What non-volatile means is, non-volatile means that the data doesn't change. That unlike, okay, let's talk about changeability of data. If you go to your bank and deposit a check today, your bank account balance is going to change right then and there. That's changeable data. If you go to a data warehouse and deposit a check, your bank balance is going to be noted as of the moment you deposited the check, and then another entry is going to be noted for what the balance looks like, so that you don't have changeability of data in a data warehouse. Time variant. Time variant means that every record of data has some moment in time associated with it. So those are the elements of what a data warehouse is. And it doesn't matter whether your data warehouse is on the cloud. It doesn't matter whether your data warehouse is on premise. Doesn't matter where your data warehouse is. That's the essence of what a data warehouse is.
Obviously, after something is said and becomes, this established idea, like the data warehouse that you've defined, subject-oriented, integrated, non-volatile, and time variant is the fourth, right? It's easy to say, again, that sounds obvious. What is it defined sort of against? It's defined against a swamp of just putting information into, storing information together without those principles.
In order to answer that question, you have to look at the world prior to data warehousing. Prior to data warehousing, people were building applications, and one group would build an application, another group would build an application, and then one day people decided that, oh my gosh, there's data across different applications that could be and should be brought together. The problem is they go to the different applications and they couldn't bring the data together. That in one application, gender is defined as M and F. Another application, gender is defined as male and female. Another application, gender is defined as a 1 and a 0. And that's a simple example of lack of integration. But when people tried to bring all of these data together and integrate the data, to do analytical processing, they couldn't do it. So the whole emphasis on data warehousing was to go back into the applications, take the applications and tear them apart and create a truly corporate understanding of data. You see, prior to data warehousing, corporations couldn't answer really basic questions, such as how many customers do you have? How much revenue do you have? What products do you have? Those questions could not be answered by all of these applications corporations had. And so with the data warehouse, you have enterprise data, and you can answer those questions.
Well, the reality is a lot of the discussions happening in our industry now are that because many companies either have not adopted a data warehouse or haven't done it correctly, they are asking those very basic questions like what's a customer and how do we measure what a purchase is. So in some ways, would you say that not a lot of are you disappointed with the lack of progress? Maybe?
Well, let me kind of give you a little historical perspective of what happens. And okay, many years ago, we had something called Year 2K coming up, and people went into year 2K and said, well, we need to bring in SAP, we need to bring in other technologies. And these consulting companies had a bonanza. I mean, the consulting companies of the world made more money off of year 2K than you can imagine. After year 2K, the consulting companies went to look for the next thing because they liked making money. And so they said, well, after year 2K, what's next? Well, the thing that was next was data warehouse. The problem is that the consulting companies, and I'm not going to name the names of the consulting companies, but the big 8 consulting companies never learned what a data warehouse was. They learned some buzzwords. They would go to their clients, and their client says, this big 8 consulting firm knows data warehouse. They've got the words down right. Let's hire them. And these consulting firms went in and built monstrosities. The consulting firms did not understand data warehousing. And so these large companies paid a lot of money for systems that weren't data warehousing type systems. And that's where today you find a lot of companies saying, oh my gosh, data warehousing doesn't work. Well, they never had a data warehouse. They had a consultant that was selling them fake information, and so that's where the failure rate came out. Now, the good news is there were a number of companies that did build a data warehouse, that did take the time to understand what's going on, and that's where the success has been. But when you see people blaming data warehouse for things, inevitably you go back to it and you find out, oh my gosh, these. Let me talk a little bit about some of the things they tried to do. One of the things they tried to do was make data warehouse into a real-time system. Data warehouse is not a real-time system. They tried to make data warehouse to where data warehouse could update data like a banking system. That's not what a data warehouse is. There were many ways in which consultants and vendors tried to bastardize data warehouse to suit their needs.
I forgot the other boogeyman in your writing besides vendors is even more so maybe the consultants, which I think
you got that
valid.
right.
That I think when you go into companies and you see the data architectures.
And I used to work for one of those consulting firms that I won't name today, and I used to work for one of those consulting firms, and I know what they did because I saw it firsthand.
Right, absolutely. So we've got a good sense of what the data warehouse is and what it was defined against. The two terms that everyone hears with Bill Inman, father of the data warehouse, and then also Inman versus Kimball. What's the 60-second 8th grade version of the Inman versus Kimball? Not so much debate, but difference in perspective, we'll call it.
First off, let me say that on a personal basis, Ralph Kimball and I have never had a bad word between us. Not once, not ever. In fact, I used to invite him to my conferences in the early days. So number one, that's the truth. Number two, in terms of Inman versus Kimball, I recommend Kimball's approach all the time. If an organization is looking for fast, easy reports, then the Kimball approach is ideal for that. But if an organization is looking for integrity of data, believable data on which to make informed decisions, then they need the Inman approach. So if you're looking for fast, easy, see, the thing about the Kimball approach says you don't need to go through all of this messy integration stuff. And the Inman approach says, guess what? It's messy, it's difficult, it's not particularly fun to do, but if you're going to have believable data, you can't have these silos of data. You've got to have integrated data.
Well, folks, you've heard it here first. Bill Inman endorsing Kimball.
You
I
got
love
that
it.
right.
And it's funny because on my list of questions was I did want to ask on a personal level, do you guys ever hang out or play poker or anything? But you're on good terms anyway.
Ralph has retired to Hawaii, and I haven't received an invitation to go to Hawaii. Although if I got one, I would go. But
Gotcha.
Ralph is in Hawaii, and I haven't heard from Ralph in a long time.
Gotcha. I wanted to take a minute to apologize to our viewers because normally the questions pop up in a stream here that I can see, and they're not coming through today. I think it's to do with the multi-stream on YouTube, so I apologize that I can't take the viewer questions. I'm very sorry about that. But hopefully, if people write them in, Bill can take a few moments after the show or another day to answer some questions on there. I don't want to commit you to that, Bill, but I do know that you spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. So let me bring in a question, though. I did crowdsource some questions on the DBT Slack. So maybe we'll bring one of those in now. These are from Josh Andrews, who's a data engineer or head of data, I forget. And he had some good questions. He wants to know your thoughts on data vault. We have so many different terms nowadays. Obviously, the warehouse, then there's also the data lake. And Josh wants to know what your thoughts are on the data vault. Or is that just another part of an architecture that doesn't really deserve its own discussion?
I liken data warehouse to be the father and data vault to be the son. That they are first off very compatible, and they're very compatible. Data vault is for people that need to have a very high degree of relatability of the data back to the source. But in terms of conflict, as far as I can tell, there is no conflict between the two.
Great. Another question from Josh Andrews. He wants to know, do you think that having conformed dimensional models is still useful given modern data warehousing tools, or should we just start denormalizing everything? I think I know your answer, but
there is an important case to be made for lots of reasons for denormalizing the data. Denormalizing data at the right time in the right place is the only way to get the performance that you need for doing certain activities. So I'm a believer in denormalization. Now, you can get carried away with denormalization, like almost anything else in life. Too much of it there is that to be said as well. So a judicious amount of well-placed denormalization saves the computer enormous amounts of cycles.
Great. I'm sure Josh will appreciate those answers. I do want to get to text analytics, but before that, one more question on warehousing. You've written a lot, including quite recently, in favor of ETL, so extract, transform, load your data into the warehouse, transform it before it gets into the warehouse, as opposed to the newer trend of ETL, extract, load, and then transform it when it's in the warehouse. Given, say, the popularity of tools like DBT now, or we'll say of DBT and then maybe some rising competitors that really emphasize the importance of transforming your data in the warehouse and doing it hopefully well with the right logic. Do you still have that same opposition to ELT that you had?
ELT was a vendor's ploy to sell more of their product. Why? Because they can do E fairly easily, they can do L fairly easily, and then they say, oh, well, we'll just let T go into the hands of the end user to do. And they knew, and everybody knew, that the end user was never going to do T. So ELT is really EL. And without transformation, you don't have a data warehouse. So ELT was a vendor's ploy to not be able to build a data warehouse. And ELT is not part of the data warehouse structure. ETL is. The thing about and listen, you're saying, gee, Bill, ETL is slow, it's complex, it's hard to do. And guess what? You're right about all of those things. It's slow, it's complex, it's hard to do. It's also necessary. And so ETL is where you get your data warehouse from. You don't get your data warehouse from ELT.
But you can, if you, or correct me if I'm wrong, you can if you do take the time and effort to do the transformations correctly in the warehouse.
I talk to a lot of people, and to date, I've talked to one company that's actually done that's actually done transformation. Now, there may be more out there because I don't talk to everybody in the world.
And you mean by they've done it properly and fully the way they should.
They've done ELT and did the T. Everybody else does E and L and forgets the T. So I've talked to one company that's done ELT and actually done the transformation.
So what are you saying that's, and again, I'm not pushing any product or tool by any means for or against, but the many companies that are adopting a tool like DBT, what are they doing? Are they just kind of doing some transformations but not doing enough? Is that your critique, or?
They're taking the lazy man's way out is what they're doing. And they end up with something that isn't a data warehouse, and they're going to call it a data warehouse, and they're going to be disappointed in it, but it's going to be their own fault.
That's interesting. Yeah, no, I appreciate the clarification. I think a lot of these discussions are happening now as, just in the current phase, that the development of data infrastructure, where people are, such as yourselves, but many others as well, such as yourself, are realizing sort of what went wrong, the many things that are going wrong, and that it's almost like a lot of things at this point need to be corrected in terms of the workflows and the infrastructure. Maybe they should have just listened to you all along. Let's dive into textual analytics. So when I reached out to you to interview you, it was obviously about data warehousing. I had no idea that your specialty or focus for the past couple of decades is the topic that's my one true love, which is text analytics. So what have you been doing? You have a company called Forest Rim Technology that specializes in text analytics. What does Forest Rim do?
Well, do you have a week? I can tell you in a week.
I'd love to take that.
Okay. Forest Rim, in the middle of data warehouse, I sat down and had this discussion with friends of mine and said, something is wrong here, because when you take a look at analytics and data warehouse, everybody is focusing in on structured data. But the truth of the matter is, when you look inside the corporation, 80 to 90% or even more of the data is wrapped up in the form of text. But text isn't being used or looked at in the corporation today. And now there's a lot of technical reasons why that's the case. But when you take a look at text, Mary, there is a wealth of information in the corporation that isn't being looked at. Let me give you a couple of examples. One of them is something called voice of the customer. That the other day, just yesterday, I was talking to a company about the fact that out on the internet is all kinds of information about their product, their company, and you know what their reaction was? Really? That you can find things out on the internet about our corporation and our products? And the answer is yeah. And oh, I didn't know that. And corporation after corporation doesn't pay any attention to what's being said about them and their products. Now, we don't have time.
You mean, say, comments on everything from Yelp to Glassdoor to Reddit that's the type of text you're
consumer
talking about.
reports. Airlines have their own sites that have report just on airlines, and there's a wealth of information out there that isn't being looked at by corporations, and corporations, quite frankly, are dumb for not looking at what's being said about them. That's one place where text has a tremendous value. Another place where text has a tremendous value is in terms of medical records. That I don't know if you know it, but when you go to a doctor and the doctor has a visit with you, the doctor writes something up. But when the doctor writes it up, it's in the form of text. Now, doctors and medical records today are designed for one doctor, one patient, and one encounter. That's what they're designed for, and they work well for that. What they're not designed for are 10,000 patients. Of going into looking at the medical records of 10,000 patients and saying, gee, let's look at COVID. What are the comorbidity factors with COVID? Is it smoking? Is it obesity? Is it cancer? Is it heart disease? What is it that people that have COVID look at? You can't do that with medical records today. And why? Because medical records are wrapped up in the form of text. And you don't want me to go, okay, I'm going to give you one more that's my pet peeve, and that's corporate contracts. That I don't know how many times I've talked to executives and said, okay, how many people in this room know what's in your corporate contracts? And to date, not one company has ever stood up and said, oh yeah, we know what's in our corporate contracts. Instead, we get this, oh gee, Bill, we got millions of these corporate contracts and each contract is different. How can we possibly know what's in our corporate contracts? And what are corporate contracts? They're nothing but text. And so whether it's corporate contracts, whether it's medical records, whether it's voice of the customer, whether it's call center conversations, whether it's warranty claims, whether it's insurance claims, the list goes on and on and on, that there is this tremendous amount of information wrapped up in the form of text that isn't getting through to the executive to make decisions on.
But and obviously, again, I'm all for the study of text data. It's like the complexity and wealth of beauty of humanity in data, right? Nothing is more of a better reflection than what humanity is than language, diversity of humanity. But the reality of even very well-established companies is that with even good data infrastructure, it's still also much that in its infancy that you are talking about companies figuring out how to deal with their transactional data and their structured analytical data. Text is just like, they're not ready for it. Wouldn't you say that? That, yes, there's a lot of insights to be found, but they're still trying to figure out how to build a proper data warehouse.
Let me make an analogy for you. Suppose you were in North Carolina in 1847. Where would you look for gold? Now, I don't know if you know it or not, but there is gold in North Carolina, that they have found some gold in the mountains of North Carolina. But and so you want to find gold, you can go to the mountains of North Carolina, and it is possible to find gold. But then one day in 1849, this guy went out to this stream in California, and he did something that's kind of interesting. He walked up and down the stream, and he picked up gold. He reached down to his fingers and said, oh my gosh, this is a piece of gold, and here's more gold. That in the early days of California, you could walk up and down the stream and pick up gold. So if you are sitting there in North Carolina in 1849 saying, gee, I want to find gold, where would you go? Would you go to North Carolina or would you go to California? And the answer is a stupid question. Of course you'd go to California, because that's where the gold is. And people today have been trying to get business value out of their structured systems, and there certainly is business value in structured systems. But I'm telling you, this is like 1848 in the United States when people discover that there's all this gold in California just waiting. Now, once they got there, they found out that they had to do more than just walk up and down the streams to pick up the gold, because by that time it had been picked up. They had to dig into the earth, and they had to do other things to get the gold. But there is a wealth of information waiting there that nobody is looking at.
Bill, we're close to time, but you told me we could go a few minutes over, and I want to keep going on this, if you don't mind. Again, fully on board with you with the love of text. Agree that 80%, if not more, of the insights to be found in data are locked in text. I'm still a skeptic that we're close to having the technology to do that. But I do want to know how Forrest Rim does it. The term you have I don't know if you call it a product, but textual disambiguation, is that right?
Disambiguation. Textual disambiguation.
I don't know if you can I don't know if you can give the 8th graders definition of that, but if you want to try, I'm all ears.
I'm not sure I can either. The problem with language is very complex. People think that language is easy because we speak it, but what we have to go back to being 2 years old, and when we were 2 years old, first we learned sounds, then we learned alphabet, then we learned spelling, then we learned words, then we learned meaning, then we learned how to put something. Now this is all going through our brain, and we take it for granted today. We take it for granted because we communicate as adults, and that's what we do and how we should do. We don't think that behind all of what we use to communicate with is a tremendous number of rules upon rules. And that's what you've got to teach the computer, is those rules. Now, having stated that, let me go back a little bit to the early days of textual ETL. The very first thing we did at textual ETL is look at something called NLP, natural language programming. And the thing about NLP is NLP was never designed to be a commercial product. To do NLP, NLP was designed to study language, not to be a commercial product. And what we decided was there's a need for a way for doing this commercially. We don't need to have 6 months study. We don't need to have PhD candidates as consultants. We need something that is simple, straightforward, and works and is inexpensive to do. And that's what textual ETL is.
Okay, so you're offering a product that will analyze your text, glean insights from it, put your text into a structured warehouse?
That's correct.
I think that's going to deserve its own show if we wouldn't truly understand. If I want to truly understand how it works,
I'll be happy to demonstrate it for you, to show it to you, and it's a real product, and we're doing some amazing things today with it.
Okay, all right. Final question, big question. You can give a short answer. Getting back to this idea that you're the father of the data warehouse, you have a real, you're a legendary role in the industry. Data's gone wrong in some ways. Data's been used for some not so good things in the world. What's your take on, again, very big question, so I'm not being fair by throwing this to you at the end, but what's your take on data ethics? Do we need citizens who are just fully aware of what's being done with their data? Do we need more regulation from the government? Or is that something that you don't really feel like you have to chime in on? You don't have to chime in on everything.
Okay, my take on it is I look at everything as an evolution, and we in our industry are still in the early days of a huge evolution, and ethics is going to come as we evolve. It's necessary. It's important. Let me tell you something. I have seen some very immoral, and I'm not even sure they were even legal uses of data warehousing. And I wouldn't touch them with a pole, but you can use data in a destructive fashion. But I think that, again, I look at it as part of an evolution. I think the ethics are going to evolve over time. I don't think they're here. For one thing, our government, in terms of the laws that they pass, the laws that we have governing technology and what we do, the people that are running the government don't have a clue as to what's going on with technology, and the laws they pass are totally inadequate.
Absolutely. No, it's like the technology itself of data, the ethics too are in their infancy. And I like that perspective. And I'm reassured in some ways by the growing sort of public awareness of data literacy. And
Yeah.
that, as you said, comes with the growth of an industry. So we're going to wrap it up there. I did not mention this to you when I was inviting you, I think, but for every episode, we make a $250 donation to Women in Data's Scholarship Fund in appreciation for the guest time. So just part of this notion that it's an amazing industry to work in, and, making it accessible to as many people as possible to have intellectually satisfying careers like you and I have had. Are having. All right. Thank you so much, Bill. This has been great. And I'm going to schedule that lunch so we can talk text. Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay. Cheers.
Thank you, Mary. Bye-bye.